Hey, what's up? This is Phoenix, and I'm going to do a brief retrospection on my book of experimental poems, Wordless. But before I transition to that, I have a quick announcement. Uh, Wordless, as well as five of my other books, including In Defense of the Mind, which is my philosophical treatise, as well as my autofiction, The Street Kid, are going to be free for Kindle until November 1st, I believe. No, November 2nd. So you have a couple more days to download your free copy. As always, you can find those books and more on my author page at amazon.com/author/phoenix_rises. I hope that you'll check them out. And yeah, so without further ado, here is my retrospection on Wordless and a kind of celebration of it being free for Kindle and me having had that book published for quite a while now. Now, I consider my book of poetry, Wordless, to definitely be an experimental collection of poetry, but the word that I prefer to use is radical because I kind of feel as though the term experimental is kind of hackneyed and cliched and doesn't gather the full force of what I'm trying to do. Uh, Granted, many of my poetry collections, such as Torque, which is free for Kindle for the next couple days, is also experimental poetry, and it was definitely responding to experimental poetry. Yet I would also call those radical poems because that is my own style and that is what I was doing. And what I mean by experimental or radical, I should say, is these poems go against certain trends in writing, such as a kind of just like milk toast way of looking at things. And so I'm not saying that traditional poetry is bad, but I do consider it to be somewhat conservative when it comes to delving into our ideas the way that we would like to. So when I think of radical, I think of poems that push you out of your perspective, that force you to look at things through a different worldview and through a different lens, rather than just presenting a poem and asking you to like it, as we might get with somebody like Mary Oliver, for instance, though no insult to her. Poetry is very fun to write. I wrote Wordless actually when I was struggling a lot with mania. So the poems capture some of those really painful experiences that I had at that time. And I am definitely, it's definitely nice to be able to look back at those poems and to see what I was going through because it helps me contextualize my experiences. There is one where I just basically describe how I'm experiencing a night of mania and pain and depression, and it sucks, and I spell sucks S-U-X, and that was kind of because it was just like many of the poems in the book. I was going for a very stream of consciousness approach, and what I mean by that is one that was uncensored as well as very free by way of its form, and not following traditional structures for poetry. Wordless has been enjoyed by many people in my fan base, and that is definitely very exciting, I would say. I know that one thing that was enjoyed about the poetry collection was its kind of like rap feel. So many of the poems have a very specific kind of like rap structure, you could call them. Though I would describe I'm also destabilizing that structure while also experiencing it. The poem I Hurt You is probably one of the best examples of that kind of rap style, though there are many others like the Massacre Interjection, for instance. And there are other poems as well that I think kind of capture that rap rhyme, as well as my poem Whole. And so there are many examples of that. I would also say that when I look at my poem Indiscriminate X, there is definitely an emphasis on mental pain as well as seeing things from a different perspective, from a more extreme perspective, as well as talking about my struggles, at least at that time, with coming out of the closet and expressing my homosexuality as I would have liked to. So Indiscriminate X is a good example of that kind of poem, with me pushing my own boundaries. I would say that aside from the rap element and elements of Wordless, there is also an emphasis on philosophy. So there is a poem, for instance, called Plotinus, which is basically a reference to the Neoplatonist philosopher Plotinus, and that is a very specific philosophical tradition that he comes from. And there are many examples all throughout the book of philosophy and me riffing on philosophy to be able to express something deeper. And that was definitely a fun project, a fun aspect and project to commit to as well for the book. One of my favorite puns throughout the book that you find especially at the end is on the wordplay of Wordless, specifically as you would find if you read the back of my print version of Wordless, that I basically say that I am wordless, I am worthless, as if all I have is a book of poems. And I liked the play on wordless and worthless, and I felt that that was a very, very cathartic and compelling way of describing things. There is much more that I could say about Wordless, but I'll let you figure the book out yourself. That is definitely your right and your privilege, and I hope that you will download a free copy. I should also rest my voice so I can get back to singing soon. I've been struggling a bit with a cold, and that hasn't been the funnest, but it will eventually get better, and I will be able to start singing again. Anyway, in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this talk, this retrospection, and this is Phoenix, and thank you for your time.